Hello. I hope you have digested a little bit what Professor Stiglitz has said. And now we shall start with our panel, where we shall discuss how people actually perceive what is happening economically and politically. The word resilience has been the key word, or the mantra, as I say recently. We have to resist in economy. Sweden has even introduced the Ministry for Psychological Resilience, an agency. So I would like our panelists from France, Germany, Slovakia, and I'll introduce them, and Hungary, to explain how are the citizens of these countries prepared for this winter? Are all these warnings something that people take seriously, or they think politicians will solve the situation, it will never happen? And my first question will be, and then I will introduce the four speakers. Professor Stiglitz has spoken of war economy. I have not heard, at least in the media that I listen to, that anyone really speaks about war economy and speaking when addressing the citizens. So that will be my first question, but before I would like to introduce our speakers, I will first ask Gilles Paris. He is writer, journalist, columnist, editorial writer in Le Monde. I'll say immediately why first France. France because it's a big European economy and it is not as dependent on Russian gas as the economy of other three countries we have here present. The second, I will ask Professor Andreas Busch from the University of Göttingen to reflect on what is happening in Germany. Who would benefit politically? Is it the far right or the far left? Or everyone trusts the government, it will be all fine? Then I shall ask Pavol Demeš. He's a civil society expert, TV anchor, and works for German Marshal Fund in Slovakia. It's a very special case in some ways. There was recently a poll, and over 40% of Slovaks said they would like Russia to win this war. So I would like Pavol to explain a little bit this. And then Marta Párdavy, she's a lawyer and co-director, co-founder of Hungarian Helsinki Committee. Well, Hungary is openly on the side of Russia, but the question is, will it benefit the government if economic hardship really comes? So the first question to Gilles, war economy that we heard Professor Stiglitz speak about, are people aware of it or not?
Yeah,
please.
My first response would be not at all. But it's funny that you mentioned the terms of war economy because Emmanuel Macron mentioned the severity of the situation in August. And he was almost Churchillian in his speech. Of course, you won't be surprised hearing that Macron is somewhere posturing on something. But I think that he felt that a wake-up call was most welcome because France was looking at the war in Ukraine from a long distance. It's far from us. And I would say that maybe 90% of the French people were unable to put Ukraine on the map before the start of the war. And France thought for a long time that it was protected by his famous French nuclear power. The fact is that we have a perfect storm concerning this source of energy because maintenance was postponed for 2 years due to the pandemic, but the industry suffered a lack of investment after Fukushima, and it came as a shock for the national pride to see that something is going wrong to nuclear electricity. So it's fueling some anxiety already present in the society.
But tell me, when I read the French press, still the question of prices is very much present, and the French have the tradition of protesting. Do you see any protests coming? Or do you see anybody really benefiting from it, like Madame Le Pen?
You heard, of course, about the tariff shield, which was decided by the government. So the energy prices are rising, but still, it's still much lower than the average of most of the countries of Europe. And the inflation is also lower. Still, there's a popular dissentiment among the society, but even before this situation to start. And I would say that we had already an insurgency in 2018, 2018, the Yellow Jacket, which was connected with an energy crisis. And what was interesting is that nobody among the political parties were able to gain from this mobilization, a huge mobilization. And so I'm not sure that the political system, even if there is also inside him a big share of protest vote, of protest movement, I'm not sure that they would be able to gain from this situation.
Thank you very much. By the way, Sputnik did get, because this was the media that gave the voice to Gilles Jaunes.
Yeah.
Professor Busch, how would you describe the situation in Germany when it comes to the mood? German media has, I will quote what Spiegel wrote in English, "These days it is difficult to tell where to draw the line between pessimism and justified panic."
I would say that the mood is serious but calm. There is no acute crisis. The spot market prices for gas, on which Germany depends a lot, have actually been going down since the end of August. There have been 2 stress tests conducted for the stability of the electricity system, and they've both been published, so everybody can see that there are no expected major interruptions. Germany has managed to actually, just to say that Germany imports about 95% of its gas, and about half of that came from Russia prior to the war. Now nothing comes from Russia. Germany is still operating. Germany has managed to diversify, to store, and to reduce consumption. Supply has been massively increased from Norway and the Netherlands, and there will also be LNG terminals. Germany hasn't had that in the past. There'll be 2 that will be operating in the course of this winter. In the meantime, there is a substantial buffer of a massive storage capacity. Germany stores 24 billion cubic meters, and they are now 90% full. So this has been actually since the beginning of March, immediately after the beginning of the war. This was all put on a crisis footing, and every attempt was made to fill up these storage tanks. So this has increased gas demand and has driven up prices, but they're not going to rise further. That is the rational expectation. The consumption goal within the EU is actually going to decrease, to actually reduce consumption by 15%, and Germany is party to that. And at the same time, one has brought old coal power stations out of retirement, and there is a debate about whether nuclear is going, the nuclear phase out, which is planned, will be going on as planned. My hunch would be that it will not actually go on as planned. If you look at opinion polls, then 85% of Germans are in favor of at least extending that until the next summer. And even 3/4 of Green supporters are in favor of that. The question is, what about the Green Party functionaries? But that's what I would expect. So in that respect, calm but serious. so no acute crisis. And the German state has been very active, both in terms of energy policy, but also in terms of fiscal measures, which have been massive. There have been 3 packages, which overall total something like 95 billion euros to basically buffer the fiscal consequences, both for consumers and for firms.
Yes, but German media is not as optimistic as you are.
No, but then you're a journalist, so you know if you cry that there is a crisis, then you will be listened to. If you explain things in calm and measured terms, there's been much less excitement about that. So let's stay calm. Let's not exaggerate the crisis, because any doing so is actually just doing Putin's business.
Well, I'm sorry, but the mayor of Berlin the other day on a German TV show was discussing whether Berlin was ready for serious power cuts of several days. Do you think that was a problem, that was a media hype, or it was a reality?
I'm not in the business of defending anything that the Lord Mayor of Berlin has said. She is not a well-known energy policy expert, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I can only reiterate, I would not take these individual sort of assessments of panic to be the real situation. Let's try to look at this in a calm and measured way. And if you do so, and there's actually a lot of information out from the federal government and from various other agencies, although, of course, I have to agree with Gilles that Scholz doesn't really do Churchill. So Macron is very good at that. Scholz will have to find his inner Churchill at some point.
Thank you. Pavol, explain to us the situation in Slovakia. It's a country that depends on Russian gas. What is the economic situation, and how can you explain that over 40% of the population would like Russia to win this war?
Thanks. So I'm in between 2 superpower representatives, country of which will turn 30 only coming January, which is still in search of mythology of state and where and how we belong to. For 18 years, we are EU NATO member, but we are in between East and West, culturally, religious-wise, historically. So when this public opinion poll occurred, many of us were in shock, both domestically, and many international friends were writing me, and I was telling I need to look at methodology first, but methodology was apparently quite okay, because it was done by Academy of Sciences. But I think that you need to look at this is a combination of real crisis with energy, politics, war economy, and political mess, which we have. Because after journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée were killed in 2018, whole country's politics went on mode, bring justice, bring state back to people. And we thought that new government, led by Igor Matovic, most bizarre politician in 3 decades, had 2/3 majority in parliament. We thought that he will be cleaning the mess and bringing justice, but suddenly COVID came and war came. And these parasites on fear and uncertainty of people, both coming from far left, far right, and even some who were socialists like Robert Fico, formerly 3-time prime minister, they started to misuse fear of people most bizarre way. I never thought that this would be possible. And as far as data is concerned, Globsec conducted survey, Slovaks, our population, is most vulnerable to Russian propaganda, and we are most vulnerable to hoaxes. So this is fact. So for that reason, Russian hybrid warfare played very successfully in Slovakia. Government needed to do something with that. 35 Russian embassy people were fired or sent home this spring. And so for us, if you take into combination of vulnerability of people vis-a-vis Russian propaganda machinery, combined with over 90% energy dependency, oil, gas, and nuclear, I think that those who are misusing situation and spreading anti-American feelings and claim that war is about America and Russia, people suddenly can be manipulated most bizarre way. And with influx of refugees, which became reality of the war, we have close to 100,000 of them, I think that people are reacting, let's stop the war, America is problem, Russia is problem, but I think that this is result of that survey which you refer to is, I think, result of poor management of politics, because Igor Matović became least popular politician within 2.5 years, winner of the elections, and Robert Fico trying to come back and rescue himself vis-a-vis criminal charges. So I think that in Slovakia we have mixture of poorly managed politics with real crisis which is related to war in our eastern neighbor.
Well, as you know, journalists love to speak to taxi drivers, and I was this summer in Slovakia for a private visit, and the taxi driver said, it is easy for you in Austria because everyone is going to get 500 euros. We are not getting anything in this country from our government, and we have to send weapons to Ukraine. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. I think that all these issues of weapons, we are the most pacifist country in the region. If you go to Vienna, you have horsemen everywhere, heroes. In Slovakia, we have poets and literary figures. We don't have any generals, admirals. So somehow this military issue or defending ourselves and how to handle things. So we were for 1,000 years part of Hungarian kingdom and 70 years part of Czechoslovakia, and somehow we were never thinking about sort of going out there and sort of having military operations. Plus, we have experience from 1968, where 500,000 Warsaw Pact troops came, and they stayed with us until 1991. We know how it feels to have temporarily stationed 100,000 troops. And so also from deeper past, Russians were part of our national awakening period. So giving arms which are killing Russians or which are killing brother Slavs in Ukraine. So there is this pacifist nature in it. And the most bizarre thing was when we got German soldiers coming with American Patriot system on our soil. This was discussed that, okay, they are going almost, even if we are NATO member, for government to translate that we are eastern flank country and we need to protect all NATO vis-a-vis Russian aggression was very tricky thing how to explain it. Also this S-300 system, which we provided early enough, luckily, new Prime Minister Heger and our President, Foreign Minister, Defense Minister, all of them are very clear cut on that. But unfortunately, opposition was misusing massively this issue of arming, selling, giving arms, that this is perpetuating war and so on. I think that we have this clash between official position of the government vis-a-vis this undercurrent misused massively, mostly via social media, social networks, by current opposition, which is trying to get rid of government. And lastly, since the theme is uncertainty, I think I do not know whether this government will last and how long it will last, whether former Prime Minister Matović will be dismissed after tomorrow's session of the parliament or not. So I think that we are living in this, unfortunately, in this political turmoil and infighting within coalition and coalition government, coalition versus opposition. And people are not getting clear-cut answers and leadership, and population is highly split on attitudes towards this conflict and also how to handle upcoming energy crisis. Even if we have only about 6% unemployment, we are per capita largest car producer in the world. Economy is doing quite fine. New Minister of Economy just announced that we don't have imminent gas or electricity crisis until end of year. Prices are fixed, but the fear which is pumped into public space because of this political infighting is creating this fear among people that what's going on upon us.
Thank you very much. Marta, well, we don't have a problem of communication in Hungary because Hungary communicates, Prime Minister Orban communicates his ideas quite clearly about energy, about his position towards Russia. However, he does have problems with Brussels, so the money may not come to Budapest. Do you think that the population can resist this winter with, or the friendship with Russia or whatever companionship, I don't know how to call it, can save Hungarians from a cold winter?
Yeah, thank you for that question and also the previous ones. And as I was thinking about it, the Hungarian mood among citizens is probably described best as anxious and uncertain when they look into their wallets and the expectations on their bank accounts. But it is disappointed and certain when it comes to who's in government. So will this lead to a political shift in Hungary? The disappointment about the assurances that the Prime Minister and his party showered on Hungarians during the beginning of the year, saying, we will save you from the soaring energy prices, our deal making with Russia is successful and ensure the stability of the very strong energy utility price caps that have basically made Hungarians live in blindness to what energy prices are costing. This disappointment is a real wake-up now for many Hungarians, I think. Now in September, private citizens, private consumers are getting energy bills that are 7, 8, 10-fold to what they were before. So it's not a gradual increase, but a sudden turn. And this is, of course, it flies in the face of the electoral promises. But then when you look at whether this would mean any change in political power and the composition of power, it probably will not yield any change. And so this uncertainty in reality is also coupled with certainty in politics, and that certainty is propped up by, as you said, the very strong and pervasive messaging that maybe with the exception of online media space really is seamlessly spread to Hungarians. And much of this messaging, of course, is meant to undermine the effectiveness of EU sanctions, the effectiveness of having a strong position against Russia, and it is basically very favorable to the Russian narratives. This also props up, of course, a very strong political support that otherwise, without such a skewed media environment, would probably not be in place to that extent.
Do you think that the opposition has any maneuvering playground to benefit from the situation, or the whole country will be poorer and poorer with one leader?
So the maneuvering playground, as you put it, is certainly there because it's maybe we haven't had such a chance to see some rule of law improvements as now. And this is sadly not an achievement of the Hungarian opposition, but rather an achievement of European politics and the consequence of Hungary's membership in the European Union. As you all know, the rule of law issue has been on the table and has been investigated and found wanting for years in Hungary. And this year, the European Commission, I think to quite a lot of people, it was very unexpected, and they were doubting, but the European Commission did decide to trigger the so-called funding conditionality mechanism, basically finding that EU funds are so much at risk that they should be potentially suspended when it comes to Hungary. And Hungary really now especially depends on this EU funding. And so this, I think, very important and very welcome step from the European Commission has led us to a situation where the Hungarian government has really done an about-face. If you look at the way they communicate, a few months ago we were persecuted, it was said, by a witch hunt that was just based on Hungary's anti-migrant policies and policies that favor the conservative values of family. And now the government is really seeking to appease both the Commission and all EU member state governments, putting forward a package of measures that are meant to ensure a stronger anti-corruption framework. And so we will, I think, see some improvements through this. This is absolutely a top-down, sort of from the EU institutions. This will, of course, not be a magic weapon. It's not going to be comprehensive in terms of the scope of the changes, but it could bring about improvements to the anti-corruption framework. So as a human rights organization, we're very disappointed, and we think far more should be done, for example, at least in the field of independence of the judiciary. And there's a lot of money on the table, and there's still the COVID recovery fund on the table, where the Commission should actually go beyond what was already agreed. But this will be, if at all, the driver of the change. And as I say, we can't expect too much from it, given the comprehensive nature of the Orbán's regime, which, as you all know, was just labeled 2 weeks ago as a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. So within an EU member state, I think this is quite outrageous, and I'm very outraged myself as a Hungarian citizen of this.
Thank you very much. As Professor was mentioning the war, and as I started, do you think that I'm not speaking of the European Union, do you think that European citizens will resist this winter? Will they be resilient? That is question number one. And question number two is, in Austria and in Germany and in Italy, there are more and more voices that say probably we shot ourselves in the feet or in our foot when we declared sanctions against Russia. And even, in public media, you would have people, citizens say, did we really have to do it? I have to close my bakery. I have to do this and that. Do you think that the government support is enough to go through this winter? And we don't know what the next one will be like, because Professor Busch was talking about the money Germany will give. But what will happen? I'm only a journalist. Well, how much money is there to be given? What will be next year? Gilles, please.
Thank you for the question. I would say that the public opinion in France is still supporting the sanctions. And it's clear-cut. There's around 40% of the people who are supporting the sanction, whatever the price for their own life.
But we are not still in winter.
Yes, of course. It's September, so we have to. It will be declining, I'm sure. But 32% were ready to support the sanction until a certain limit, and only 27% were already against the sanctions. But the war in Ukraine is such a no-brainer that it's such an easy situation to understand that there is people agree on the fact that we should sanction Russia and that we should help even militarily Ukraine. And there is question about the efficiency of the sanction, efficiency of the military aid, even if the last counterattacks in Ukraine was good news for the government, but still the mood is in favor, definitely in favor of Ukraine. The fact that the government is spending so heavily to lower the price of energy also deprive the oppositions, because we have three main oppositions in France, of room of maneuver. they cannot say a lot of things. And as I mentioned, I think one of the biggest problems in France is maybe that we have a dysfunctional political system. We have a traditional party which are disappearing, but which have still a network of elected officials, but there are fewer and fewer voters, and we have movement built around personality. Macron was one of them, but it's the case also with France Unbowed, La France Insoumise, around Jean-Luc Mélenchon. It's the case also with the National Rally, Rassemblement National, with the far right, even if Le Pen is a familiar name in the French politics. But those parties have no organization. There's only one guy or one woman, in the case of the National Rally, who will set the agenda and take the decision. And I'm not sure that they are well positioned to feel the mood of the people and to translate it into political proposals or policies. So I'm afraid that this disconnect between the public opinion and the political system would worsen the crisis. If we look at the last cycle of election we had, at the first round of the presidential election, which is very important in France, something around 56% of voters decided not to go to the poll, to vote with a blank vote, or to support the National Rally or France Unbowed, which labeled themselves as anti-system. And if you look at the first round of the parliamentary election in June, something like 45% of the people decided not to go to express their vote. So that's a problem.
Thank you very much. Professor Busch, where would you place Germany in terms of, do we support the sanctions? Will it be resilient? I know you're an optimist, and I would like you to bring some optimism here.
I'm not an optimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm neither in the business of being optimist or pessimist. I try to be an analyst. And I'm also not in the business of making predictions. I can make assessments, and the reaction obviously will depend on the depth of the crisis in Germany. Now, as I've tried to outline before, there is at the moment no indication that there will be a serious energy crisis in Germany, and we must not talk it up. We must not feed the attention economy. We must not give fodder to the trolls. If we look at political support, actually we have a good measuring rod, because today, a year ago, the federal election was in Germany. And that resulted in the so-called traffic light coalition. The minister in charge of most of this, apart from the finance minister, has been the Minister of the Economy and Climate Protection, who is one of the leading Green politicians, Robert Habeck. His personal support has been down in the last 2 months. There's been unpleasant things coming from his ministry. And the Green support has also come down by some 5 percentage points. However, compared to last year's result, the Greens at the moment are still 4 percentage points up. So they've seen a very good development for them. It's been quite popular, and we need to see that. By the way, the federal election last year, and I think everybody needs reminding of that, in Germany resulted in a clear strengthening of the center. The center parties were strengthened. It was both the left and the right extremes which lost. Actually, the left party barely scraped into parliament at all. Just to remind everybody of that. In the coalition, there's been some infighting, particularly between the FDP and the Greens. This is about how you precisely which instruments do you use, at which point do you draw in a price floor, do you support individual customers? There is the famous gas surcharge. The finance minister was in favor of it because it meant that if the money doesn't need to come from government coffers, he can keep his hallowed debt break. On the other hand, he has now just learned, it seems, that a gas surcharge will actually feed into the inflation rate and therefore sort of propagate, and now he seems to make a ever so mild U-turn. So in spite of all this infighting, my prediction is that the German government is going to be stable, and if only then for lack of alternatives for all parties concerned. But also, the Germans are not in the business of quickly jumping ship. If you look at German governments, German chancellors, they are usually in the business for a long time. I'm not going to predict that Scholz is going to equate Chancellor Merkel's record, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a substantial insecurity or imbalance in the present government. And if you don't take my word for it, Mariana, look, I ask you to look at the Lower Saxony regional election in 2 weeks' time. That will be a test. And if there are no substantial changes there, I think you should calm down your worries. We should not emphasize single voices. Of course, there are always single voices. I talked about why there is an incentive to do that. Now, lastly, your question about support for Ukraine. Support for Ukraine is very strong in Germany, and it is surprisingly so, and it is surprisingly stable. If you look at opinion polls, and I have the gold standard for that is the Politbarometer, which has been going on for a very, very long time. When I looked it up, I was actually surprised myself that the support for Ukraine did not waver over the summer. If you ask people the question, are you in favor of Germany supporting Ukraine in spite of the rising prices and energy prices, you get a 70% yes. That is a lot, and it hasn't changed since July. So that is when the energy crisis actually developed. So that's very stable, and it's even more interesting if you look at the supporters of the various parties. In spite of what many people will think, Social Democrat supporters are in favor by 82%. That's a 4/5 majority. If you look at the Green Party supporters, it actually looks like 30 years ago in the old socialist countries, 97% in favor. The Liberals, 3/4 in favor, 74%. The Christian Democrats, 73% in favor. The only party that, of course, deviates from that consensus is the Alternative for Germany. It's the right-wing populists. But even they have come up from July, from 15% support of Ukraine in spite of rising prices to 30%. And the left party, which is at the moment actively deconstructing itself and is probably going to split in the next couple of weeks or months, even their supporters support Ukraine in spite of rising energy prices by 59%. So my message is quite clear. Based on what we have, the best opinion polls we have, if we ask detailed questions and if we evaluate the responses, it's clear that support for Ukraine, in spite of the rising prices and energy prices in Germany, is very strong and very stable. I think that's a very good message.
Thank you very much. I also I want to open the floor for questions, but sorry, Pavol and Marta, I asked basically the same thing. Do you think the way things are going now, and considering government measures, that Slovak citizens will go through this winter without major problems? And, well, we know that the support for Ukraine there is different.
Yeah, generally, I think we will get through it, in spite of the fact that we have turmoil in politics. What we have difference, I cannot say that I can predict that government will last. Germany and France and Hungary can say our government will last. I cannot say that. And this is bringing this fear of uncertainty. Whatever new government composition will be, how, what, whether Fico and similar types coming back, how they will, whether they will bring, in order to create majority, some extremists to government and so on. So we have more domestic political uncertainty rather than trust in being member of European Union and NATO. I think that key anchor for our people is, and you, because one would think that we are pro-Russian. We are not pro-Russian. Questionnaire was about ending war and stopping and so on. So for people, this is rather, but we are over 70% pro-EU, well over 50% pro-NATO, and we see that security guarantee, economic guarantee are related to our EU and NATO membership. And I think that this is critically important. Also, even if we are over 90% dependent on energy on Russia, nowadays, Prime Minister traveled to Italy, sign agreement with Italians, traveled to Poland, sign agreement with Poles, to get southern and northern corridor, and so diversification of energy is becoming leading theme because we know that Russia is unreliable and we don't know how all of these will turn out, but we know that European solidarity and cooperation with neighbors and so on is critically important to survive that. And as far as support for Ukraine, I think, and it was big surprise, we were strongly anti-immigrant country before Ukraine war. You know, whenever immigrants, we don't have immigrants. Slovakia is the only country in EU we do not have a single mosque. So for us, anything coming from outside is a little worrisome and creates turmoils, but I mean, vast majority of people welcomed Ukrainian refugees and helping, and this was not about governmental politics, municipalities, churches, volunteers, and all of this. So I think that in this regard, helping Ukrainians, helping refugees, humanitarian assistance, military assistance, this is something which is already built in, and I don't think that this will change at all. Here we are part of rest of the European
Thank you very much. Marta?
So my expectation is that Hungarian citizens will really feel the crunch this winter. It's already happening because of these unexpected or uncalculated, extremely high surges in utility costs. This means that not only families, but institutions themselves have no way to finance this. So local municipalities and also governmental agencies and governmental services could not plan for this in their budget. So already there's talk about not only decreasing heating to 18 or 19 degrees, but also closing welfare institutions, particularly those run by the civil sector, and charities will be hit very hard. And as all crisis, this is probably going to hit those who would need the most assistance the hardest. This will also be probably, sadly, similarly as in previous years, be a very polarizing, politically very polarizing period with an immense amount of government funding poured into propaganda. The Hungarian government probably has carried out surveys that indicate that the Hungarian population is not very supportive of the energy sanctions because it's so linked to the high cost of gas and electricity in the government's narrative. And so to boost this skepticism further, there's going to be a so-called national consultation, usually a very steered and manipulated set of questions posed to every Hungarian household, which could provide further political, well, it will serve the political support that the Hungarian government might need to flag in EU-level discussions for its position that sanctions are really harming us more than Russia. And this is consistent, and so Hungarians will, while feeling the devastating impact potentially of high prices, would also know who to blame.
Thank you very much. I open for questions. First Andreas, then Philip. Please introduce yourself.
So my name is András Németh, I'm from Hungary, and I have a question for all of you. So Mirjana said that in Sweden there is a special agency which is fighting propaganda. What your governments and civil society are doing to counter Russian propaganda in your own country? Because it's a very important question. Sorry for Marta, it's difficult for you to answer because in Hungary the main tool of the Russian propaganda is the national public TV, but what are the civil societies can do?
Thank you very much. The second question, and then Philip. Yeah.
Hi, thank you, Philip Nubel with Global Voices. This is a question mostly to Pavol and Marta and related also to the previous question. How do you explain this historical amnesia? I mean, you were talking about, of course, people still having been through, the Soviet invasion in '56 or in '68, and we see the success of the Russian propaganda and people not necessarily understanding that yesterday was us, today it's Ukraine. And would you put the blame more on Hungarian or Slovak society, or the same from Czech? I'm from the Czech Republic, of not doing enough to look at its own history, or do you blame it solely on social media? Thank you.
Thank you. Who will start? You?
I would say that on the surface, the Russian influence is quite limited because we know who is conveying the Russian messaging concerning the Ukraine and the war. So it's quite easy to identify them and to contradict what they are saying. Under the surface, on Facebook, there is a lot of things going on, but there is no translation up to now in the public opinion or of a change of mood, of a change of the image of Putin, which is terrible. The image of Putin is terrible, and the image of the Russian army, especially after the invasion, is terrible. So it's a really an uphill battle for the Russian propaganda when it comes to the French opinion.
Thank you. Pavol?
Yeah, I think that Slovakia could be used almost as test case in this topic because there are a lot of minuses but a lot of pluses or approaches how to counteract Russian propaganda, because as I mentioned in my opening introductory statement, we are most vulnerable out of Visegrad 4 countries and to Russian propaganda. And this expulsion of 35 diplomats this year just proved people didn't know that we have so many Russian diplomats. If you kick out 35, how many more in 5 million country are they, and what are they doing? Also seeing live, Russian ambassador nowadays is like dissident, because before 24th of February, he said there will be no invasion. This is American propaganda. When invasion occurred, he was invited to our foreign ministry and he was running away from media. He was unable to comment, and now he's unable to comment anything. Moreover, Sergei Lavrov used to be like hero, doyen of foreign ministers in our region. Nowadays he acts as clown. He's disappearing from after his UN performance and he cannot comment on anything. So I think that Russians are showing their true faith through official diplomatic, political and other steps. Moreover, since its neighboring countries seeing these atrocities, what are occurring across the border, and vast majority of refugees, what we have are mothers with children. And they are telling their stories, what's going on with their families and so on. So we have large-scale, quick education and learning process what Russia and Russian world and Russian vision of the world is all about. Moreover, there is one clash because Slovakia is quite religious still country, after Poland, most Catholic country. Watching Pope Francis and his performance, it's difficult even for Slovak church to agree with what Pope is saying. Lately he mentioned that arming Ukraine is morally justifiable because this is for self-defense. So for many priests and bishops, this is rather problematic just to repeat the words of the Pope. So I think that we see a lot of changes in this battle against Russian propaganda from various corners. And in structured way, government, through Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, they created special units which have specialists now to how to counteract propaganda, because before that it was sort of obvious people can learn and find. Secondly, there is a lot of debate how to block Facebook, and Facebook is leading source of information in my country. So several members of political class had blocked Facebook because they were actively spreading Russian narratives. So this issue of freedom of speech, what to do with websites of pro-Russian media outlets, it's a big topic, and how to block individual Facebook profiles or whether and how to do that. So now it's big.
And we are
topic.
Discussing this in an institution that defends press freedom.
Yeah, and last but not least, I think that I'm surprised how opinion-making segments within society, namely academia and churches of all denomination, how unprepared they are to deal with this war situation in general and with counteracting Russian propaganda. Church and academia, rather, they can talk about they need more money to heat student dorms, but they are not telling and how and what to do. So I think that it would be extremely useful if we would spread or learn from one another also how to revitalize this. And last but not least, media. Many serious media are having special sections and specialist journalists who are getting out these facts and figures and what are hoaxes on. So we have several very good journalists who became specialists on
Fact-checking.
anti-Russian propaganda.
Thank you, Marta, and then Professor Busch.
Yeah, to the first question about what is civil society doing to counter Russian propaganda and disinformation, well, there is quite a lot of activities in Hungary that are carried out by civil society and independent media. There's important and really high-quality fact-checking and debunking sites. One is called Lakmus, for example, which is something that should be supported. There is also a lot of civil society organizations interested in countering but not knowing what to do. So definitely more support for this kind of expertise or the development of such expertise necessary. The social media platforms' responsibilities, I think, are key in this regard, but not only when it comes to Hungary. But all this cannot, be a really effective pushback when the disinformation is coming from the government or basically media conglomerates funded by the government. So it's always been remarked that there is no need to really spread disinformation from Russian sources in Hungary because we have sadly our own, and these are part of the propaganda media empire. So there's more to do, and certainly a focus at the European level on media freedom, not only in terms of protection against attacks, but legal and other policy measures to support plurality in media. Independence, particularly in public service media, is really needed, and I don't see this happening at all yet. When it comes to your question about historical amnesia, Ukrainian refugees, I think, were very well received initially by Hungarian citizens, and there was the same kind of outpour of spontaneous support that you saw elsewhere too. We have about 30,000 Ukrainians who have registered for temporary protection in Hungary. These are the individuals who have a right to be assisted and have a reasonable expectation to be assisted by the state. So when you hear the Hungarian government talk about 900,000 Ukrainian refugees who've been assisted, that basically means the door was opened for them and they were allowed to pass through the country, like many other refugee flows in the past. So this is a small number, and those who are involved in assisting them now that we're in the 7th, 8th month of the war, I think are under enormous strain. There is a high degree of burnout among those who assist refugees, but this issue is largely invisible. So that level of high outpour of support is not sustainable, of course, but it's also not matched by supportive statements or positions from the Hungarian public officials. So it's out of sight, out of mind for most, sadly.
Professor Busch, but make it short. I would like 2 more questions before we take a break.
I'll try to make it short. First, some of the resonance also actually comes from civil society. So civil society is not per se always on the side of the good. But in the German case, I think it's not very organized, although there is a resonance for some individuals who in the never-ending talk shows actually try to form their own personal brand around being controversial. Yesterday, they used to be experts on pandemics and vaccination. Today, they've effortlessly transformed into strategic experts. Fortunately, there are lots of real experts around from a number of institutions like, say, the European or the German Council on Foreign Relations. So we have wonderful people who are also giving expertise. And journalists, of course, need to be reminded that there is no reason why you should balance each expert with an idiot. Leave it to the experts. On the political side, there is sometimes a false sense of equivalence. If I have an expert from here, I need to have somebody who says exactly the opposite, even if there is absolutely no reason and no foundation for that. That should not be followed, and that is also a responsibility for civil society, for journalists as part of civil society. In terms of the political forces, it's actually bordering on the ridiculous. The AfD, that's the right-wing populists, they actually sent 3 politicians to the Donbass to look for themselves, but they actually got afraid once the shells really started flying and quickly retreated to the safety of Germany. In the Left Party, a former leader of the parliamentary party gave a rousing speech accusing Europe and the United States of starting an unwarranted economic war against Germany's main energy supplier, and the result was that several high-profile members of the Left Party who had endured until now actually left the party. So I think that overall the situation is healthy. We must balance it with freedom of expression. That's quite clear.
And without journalists.
No, but journalists need to be aware of the role they play and the responsibility they have. And I, for one, but that's just my opinion, think that we have a few too many talk shows. And they all try to differentiate themselves and to actually win in the marketplace. And you win by being controversial. And that's not healthy for the overall reasonable debate that we need in every society, in the German as well as in many others.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions? Do you have any questions online?
There is no questions online. I might just add short question to Mr. Busch.
Okay, so now we have 2 questions and yours. You start, then Alison, and then Stephanie.
It's really just short, but one of the short-term reliefs is taking a lot of money. And particularly in Germany with the Schuldenbremse and all that, you're one of the main proponents that keep up the 60% thing in the European Union contract. So you think that that's sort of softening, or How's that developing?
We shall get all three questions and then replies, and then we'll, Alison?
Yes, Alison Smale. I'm a freelance writer and former New York Times journalist. I only was prompted to put my hand up by this assertion of what journalists should and should not debate. I mean, I think we really have to understand that, yes, the free press plays a very big part in any democracy, but there's a lot more debating in newsrooms of false equivalency than you might think. And I just wanted to note that.
Thank you so much, Alison. Stephanie?
Very quickly, a little bit a different question from my side. My name is Stephanie. I'm director of the International Institute for Peace. My question would be when it comes to this whole energy crisis situation. I mean, we heard from Germany, they have been a lot more dependent on Russian gas, and Austria is the same. It's different, for example, for France. How do you see the possibility that, similar to what happened during the COVID crisis, that the European Union would actually come together and that we would together, I don't know, like find something like energy autarky, if we would like share and spread or whatever, because this could actually give us more resilience towards what is happening and also towards the propaganda and how you can influence the people on the ground. So how do you see this possibility of a common European Union?
Go to Professor Busch?
It goes actually to everyone. I mean, it's,
well, we have
yeah,
like
how
2-3
do you see the
minutes
possibility?
left.
We know it's difficult, yeah.
Okay,
Well, so I guess you should...
First two were to me, so I'll leave the rest to the others. The debt brake softening, that's an interesting debate, or it's an interesting question. From a theoretical point of view, as a political scientist, I would say, well, there is a potential to swap softening of the debt brake to with softening of the nuclear phase-out. That would involve both the Liberals and the Green Party. I think the Green Party would be well advised to think about that, and the Liberals would also be well advised. It's difficult to predict, but I would not be surprised if there was some movement there. On journalists and discussions in newsrooms, I'm very aware that that is the case. I was not making a general judgment. I was just saying that there are a few media outlets in Germany where I would be grateful if that debate could be upped just a little bit.
And the question of Stephanie about energy?
I would say that the fact that we have already an integrated market for electricity is a good thing. It could be only reinforced with what we will face. So somehow it could reinforce the European Union, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Well, now we have a break. We are a bit late, so may I give you 20 minutes? Oh, Professor, you wanted to ask a question? Yeah. Please, go ahead.
A very brief question.
There is a microphone.
Yeah. A very brief question which is related to some of the remarks I made. And it's related also to the question about European cohesion. One of them is, more specifically, I mentioned that governments don't like to think of themselves being on wartime footing. What would be the response to European leadership if they said, you know, we really are at war and we need to respond? You know, an economic war, but Ukraine's troops, but our economic backing of that. And the second question is, I pointed out the failures of the European energy system. So the integration was a great thing, but they integrated on the wrong principles. So, and in some countries like Slovakia, they protected the citizens, and in France, they protect the citizens to some extent. The question is, in some ways, is there any recognition of the flaws of the system? I mean, obviously, there should be, and the willingness of governments to do something about it. And we've seen some of the peculiar thing, not peculiar, but the nationalization of the energy company in Germany. The policies of the EU went some way, but only a limited way. You know, the windfall profits tax was very narrow in its scope. There are private contracts the traders have bought a lot of electricity in some of the countries and are making huge windfall profits and are unrestrained from the price caps. And that was a result of lobbying by the producers. But all this goes beneath the surface, and the energy market is so complex that most people don't really realize what is going on. So the question is there any possibility of political support for a more fundamental, at least wartime, revision of the energy framework?
Well, who will start? Will you start, Gilles, and then we go this way?
I think it's already on the table in France that to reform this electricity market is already a priority for sure.
Yeah, I may try to answer your question, Professor, related to this cohesion of Europe and the feeling somehow that we are in the same boat tackling with all of these issues, and also admitting that we are at war economy or whatever war. The very beginning, if you would look at how we were labeling what happened after February invasion of Russian troops, first, Putin used language, this is not a war, this is special operation. Yeah, and only now, when he had to mobilize, being beaten by Ukrainian forces, supported by us, he suddenly is showing this kabuki back home that this is probably war if we need to mobilize. And even he's not saying that this is mobilization, this is partial mobilization. So this playing with words is, if you look at how we labeled it, we called it Russian invasion or Russian what? And this was like local between two countries thing. Later on, we suddenly started to use that we are at war because Putin already started saying that collective West, we need to fight with collective West. We didn't know that we are collective West. Now we are collective West. We are supporting Ukraine and we are at war. So we are admitting it. And I think that it is extremely healthy for Europe and for transatlantic community that we are starting using this term, because with this irrational Putin Patriarch Kirill joint venture, this is going to be unpredictable. This is going to require on us sacrifice. And the sooner we label it properly, the better for us to design political strategy and psychological strategy. And here I fully agree with Professor Busch that we need to do everything not to show weakness vis-a-vis Russia, that we are nervous, that we are weak. We can win this only if we will say, well, we are much stronger than you, we are ready to fight with you, and there is no alternative for us than to defeat you. If we will not propagate this on daily basis, politicians, people, educational families, I think that he is winning because he counted on that we will be weak and he will be strong. And now he is in shock. EU led by women, Ursula von der Leyen, and she is traveling to Ukraine, she is with Zelensky here and there. Two female prime ministers, Finland and Sweden, decided to join NATO. And all of them are a bit in chaos in Russia, seeing unity and decisiveness of us, not to lose the war.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'll try to be brief and make 3 points. First, I don't think a war rhetoric is going to be helpful in Germany. This is about, to use the fabled British slogan, to keep calm and carry on. And so in Germany, at least, I would say reducing uncertainty is what is called for. Upping the rhetoric, apart from the fact that our present chancellor is not very good at that, is not going to help in my assessment. As far as the EU is concerned, yes, this is a crisis and the EU needs to deliver. It needs to show that it's helpful. There is a somewhat ironic theory of European integration, which is called the bicycle theory. It needs to be moved forward, otherwise it keels over. If you look at past crises, such as the financial markets crisis, it has actually led to further steps in European integration, like the EU semester and all that. So perhaps this is a chance to bring that forward as well. There is lots of discussion, particularly in academic circles, about the precise energy market design. However, politics is its own realm. It has its own logic. We've known that since Machiavelli. And economists need to recognize that. And so give it some time. I think if there are obvious flaws, then things will very likely this will be an opportunity to learn from the crisis. The EU has, in general, over the last decades, used crises to learn and to actually improve.
Thank you. Marta, a comment, short comment, because we are late.
So to learn from the crisis and to pool the resources within the EU to help us through this presupposes not only these sectoral solutions, but also that member states trust each other. At least they can trust the deals that they've made with each other, right? So that we would have sufficiently strong guarantees for that. And I think from a Hungarian perspective, this trust is not there, and it shouldn't be blind. And when it comes to, for example, future mutual financing, something that could resemble the COVID recovery fund, I think a lot of member states are extremely cautious about this because they don't see that there would be strong enough guarantees that their taxpayers' money would not be ending up in the pockets of people who are otherwise interested in actively undermining EU unity. So it's not only, for the sake of principles, but also for the sake of very pragmatic reasons that I think we need to really ensure that this trust is followed up with the delivery of commitments. And this is why the rule of law conditionality mechanism, although now it concerns Hungary, but it has a very strong European dimension in the future. And this is why it needs to be, this is the moment. We have one shot to get this right. And otherwise, disappointment will also impact how we can work together in the future to overcome crisis. And this is a very risky endeavor now. So I think this is why we need to push for more. Just one last thought. So when it comes to EU unity, you might recall that about a week ago, there was a European Union position was proposed in the UN Human Rights Council, so that the European Union would have one voice to support a special rapporteur to be set up in the UN Human Rights Council to investigate crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine, and Hungary actually vetoed this. And so 26 member states had to speak on their own, and it happened, but Hungary actually blocked investigating human rights atrocities in Ukraine through the UN Human Rights Council. So I think when it comes to where is our EU unity, we really have to take a hard look at how strong that is at the moment and where it's going.
Well, I thank everybody for the. Thank you all for your thoughts, inputs. It gives a lot of food for thinking and for articles and further debates. We shall shorten the break to 15 minutes, but there are some little sandwiches so that you have enough energy to hear about, to listen about energy, which is our last debate that our two experts will speak in concrete terms about what to expect this winter and what to expect in the future with green energy. So there is about 15-minute break, and continue talking to our speakers and the professor.